Like, you don't want them in their crate?
Oh, no, no.
And sort
Good afternoon, colleagues. I am wishing to call, now that we have quorum, the 14th Committee of the Corporate Services Committee to order. And I will begin by acknowledging that the City of London is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Pewak, and Attawandaron peoples. We honor and respect the history, languages, and culture of the diverse Indigenous people who call this territory home. The City of London is currently home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people today, and as representatives of the people of the City of London, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live in this territory. The City of London is also committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for meetings upon request. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact csc@london.ca or phone 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Colleagues, I'll begin by looking for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. And I see none, so moving on to the consent agenda. I have been asked to pull 2.5 by Councillor Trussow, so we will have 2.5 dealt with separately, and we will deal with that at the end of items for direction. Looking for any other items colleagues wish pulled for a separate vote. Seeing none. Councillor Trussow?
Just a question. Is Councillor Hopkins with us?
Councillor Hopkins is not with us.
Online?
Sorry, no, Councillor Hopkins is not with us.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, seeing none, I will look for a mover and a seconder on the balance of the consent agenda. So that's 2.1 through 2.4 and 2.6 through 2.8. Once we have that moved and seconded, we can have some discussion on those. And I see Councillor Stevenson moving and Councillor Ferreira seconding. And I will open the floor now to questions and comments. And Councillor Hopkins has actually just joined us virtually by Zoom. Councillor Hopkins, I just want to let you know that the consent agenda has been moved excluding 2.5, but you do have a communication on there from the Association of Municipalities of Ontario Board Advocacy. So I wondered if you wanted to perhaps speak to that item in particular.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for recognizing me, and my apologies for late to speak to the letter now.
And Councillor Hopkins, I appreciate you having your video on for us, but you are breaking up a little bit in audio. So I don't know if you wanted to perhaps turn your camera off, and that might provide the bandwidth to allow you to speak to us verbally nice and clearly.
Okay, how about this? There's been lots of rain happening around my house, so I can always count on disruptions.
And you are coming in nice and clear now.
Thank you. And again, thank you for recognizing me. If I could just speak to the committee, my letter that is attached, giving you an update on the AMO advocacy that's been going on the past year. In fact, when it comes to homelessness, AMO advocating on behalf of all municipalities, the challenges that we are having with dealing with the homelessness and the housing situation, as well as we're trying to keep the conversation with the provincial government when it comes to the impact reassessment, encouraging them to start that process. So that's the AMO advocacy that's going on. I would like to give you an update on my position at the AMO board. I am still a board member and will continue to be so. If you will allow me, I will be removing myself from chairing the Large Urban Caucus, and I just want to give you a bit of an update. The Large Urban Caucus, as chair, I was able to sit on the executive as well as to participate in the MOU meetings, and I felt the past number of years, especially through COVID, it really has been an honor and a privilege to not only represent the City of London, but represent all municipalities with the provincial government as it relates to the importance of staying whole as a municipality as we dealt and pivoted dealing with COVID. I'm reminded by our city manager's comments once a number of years ago that municipalities needed to be kept whole, and we were able to do that with the help of the provincial government in particular to keep us providing services throughout the challenges of COVID. And I just felt it was so important and have learned so much about the importance of what municipalities do provide to the public. And with that, I also want to remind everyone the AMO conference is happening in our city in August 20th to 23rd, and really encouraging all council members to be attending as many events as they can throughout the conference, and really looking forward to hearing and seeing what our delegations are going to look like as we get closer to the date. So with that, Mr. Chair, those are my comments, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. And I think before we move on, I'll just look to see if committee members have any questions for you in particular with regard to your AMO report before we move on to questions and comments on other consent items. And I'm not seeing any, which I think speaks to the thoroughness of your written report and sharing your comments with us. And I know I'm looking forward to AMO as well. And I believe Councillor Santos from Burlington may be in touch with you about some other fun ideas for the AMO conference this week. So I have passed along your contact information to her. Thank you for taking the time to join us at committee today to share that update with us. Colleagues, I'm going to look to see if there's questions or comments on any other items on the consent agenda, excluding 2.5, which we're dealing with separately. Councillor Pribble.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the staff. I have a couple of questions regarding 2.1 and 2.3, 2.4, and I'll start with 2.1. On page 8, the investment strategy, we are stating the 4 priorities, and I was just wondering if there are any proposed changes or if we feel these 4 strategies are, the prioritization is still the best for us. Thank you.
Ms. Barbon.
Thank you through the chair. We do believe that those strategies are still the right ones. We're not recommending any changes at this time. Certainly those form the backbone of what our investment strategy is to try to ensure that we ultimately maximize the use of those funds and what those revenues will generate and minimize the risk of loss ultimately. So certainly if there were any changes that would be proposed, those would come forward for council approval.
Thank you for that. Councillor Pribble.
Thank you very much for that one. And if we can go on page 11, and I do realize that we take the more passive buy and hold approach, but based on the annualized gains and losses as of end of last year, would you make any other recommendations or propose any changes to maximize our opportunities?
Ms. Barbon.
Thank you through the chair. So one of the things that is significantly changing is the accounting standards, which are now going to result in the accounting that is going to bring those unrecognized gains and losses for recognition on our financial statements. So certainly from the buy and hold approach that the City of London has and through the proactive financial management to manage our cash flows, our strategy is to ensure that those investments are held to maturity to minimize the risk of any potential gains or losses until the investment finally comes to the end of its term. So certainly from our perspective, we're not recommending any changes because changes would mean that if we were to sell, might actually cause those losses to be realized. So certainly maintaining our current strategy will ensure that those losses do not actually come to fruition.
Thank you, Ms. Barbon. Councillor Pribble.
Thank you. Do we actually have a date when when we are going to receive these updates from the other levels of government? Is there a specific date or not yet of the new regulation?
The
Ms. Barbon.
accounting standards, through the chair, are already in effect, and they become effective at the end of this financial term. So if you recall back at the accounting, the presentation that was done by KPMG, our external auditors, in that package, they reviewed some of those changes that will be coming, and they will be effective for any year ends as of 2023. So ours will be effective when we bring forward our financial statements. So this gives you a bit of a sneak peek in terms of some of the things you might see that are going to be contained in the financial statements. But if you go back and refer to the audit committee presentation from KPMG, they provide a little bit more detail as to what that actual standard is, when it became effective, and a little bit of history related to that.
Thank you, Ms. Barbon.
Perfect. No more on 2.1. If I can continue 2.3, or if someone else wants to.
Well, let's see if
Discuss.
committee members want to get on the speakers list. Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you, and through you. I actually also have questions for 2.3 for the emergency procurement. I'm not sure if they're the same as Councillor Pribble's, but I was just hoping to maybe just get maybe a summary on just the actions that we took on that day. And then I guess if Councillor Pribble has any follow-up questions, just go back to him.
Well, I know Mr. Yeoman was not in that role on the date of that storm, so I'll go to Ms. Scher first and then see if she wants to pass the puck over to Mr. Yeoman for some additional information.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When the derecho hit on the May long weekend of last year, we fully deployed all of our in-house and contracted forestry staff, and we required additional support from external contractors who were able to bring in equipment that were able to deal with felled matured trees in a very quick manner in order to clear those streets, provide emergency access, and support our colleagues at London Hydro who are working to restore power. This is related to the procurement of those non-standard contractors, not the folks we usually have on contract, but the ones that were brought in on an emergency basis with some very specialized equipment that allowed us to get things back to normal as quickly as possible for impacted Londoners.
Thank you, Ms. Scher. Councillor Ferreira, you're good? Okay, Councillor Pribble.
Thank you, through the chair, to the staff. And page 17, in terms of the reviewing operational needs, my question is the review and recommendations before the implementation would come to to this committee, CSC, before implementing. Is my assumption correct?
Ms. Scher.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we would bring anything that requires council approval, whether that's a change to policy, budget, or procurement of new assets. That would be an excessive administrative authority to do so, back to committee. If there are changes we need to make to our equipment or response strategies that we can do within existing budgets, then that would be done within those existing budgets, subject to the council policies that govern them.
Thank you, Ms. Scher.
Thank you. And will this review include the past experiences and the events? And what I'm trying to say is not just the cost, let's say budget, but also kind of looking at the past. If we do propose a certain capital expenditure, how many times would we used it in the past if this part is going to be included in this review?
And we're going to ask Mr. Yeoman about this because it is his going forward.
Well, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So I really appreciate the question. It was a pretty unique event that we experienced last year. However, with climate change and changing weather patterns, we do anticipate that we might be seeing things like this that are a bit more frequent in the future. So what we're doing is we're doing a bit of a two-pronged approach. We're looking at equipment that we can buy, perhaps to augment our existing equipment, as Ms. Scher mentioned, or equipment that would be multi-purpose that we could acquire in the future as well to address some of these to respond really quick. Another option would be to look at equipment that we could have on retainer, for example, where we'd have a contractor that we would have a relationship with that we can action a little more frequently. In this instance, we actually were quite lucky that these vendors were available and they did have the equipment on hand, which may not be the situation in the future, which is what we're trying to look at.
Okay, thank you for that. And by the way, comment, I was, in that time, I was on Paul Mullen and Colburn, and I saw, I don't know if it was the city staff or it was the external, but it was a very prompt response, certainly on these two roads, so kudos to whoever was involved in that. Thank you. And 2.4, the reporting, and if we can go on page 24, sorry, 2.4. And it's 2.6 reporting. And the annual report to council is a positive initiative, but I hope that if we were to find out that there are certain things that are either not protecting the corporation enough, or if there are certain things that are delaying the projects, that the director would come back to us first, earlier, and not wait till the annual report. And I just want to make sure that I'm assuming correctly that this would actually happen and we would not wait for the annual report. Thank you.
Well, let's ask Ms. Scher about that.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yes, if there were a need to change this policy because it is not meeting our needs in one way or the other, we would not necessarily need to wait till the next annual report. We would make sure we came back to this committee for a change to that delegated authority to ensure that we're meeting those standards of public protection, protection of city assets, but also advancing work in a way that is prompt and responsible.
Councillor Pribble?
Perfect, thank you very much. And I do have last one regarding the schedule on page 28. And the line 4, 5, and 6, they're all under the 1. And my question is why 4 and 6 is DCM not able to delegate and 5 able to delegate? And why authority to execute is no, no, yes, respectively to that table? So I was just curious, what was the decision making based on this thought? Thank you.
Ms. Scher, did you want to respond to that, or Ms. Ramalou?
Thank you. Through the chair. So the first one, why the incentive agreements can be delegated to the director, whereas the other two cannot. The incentive agreements with utilities, it typically results in a cost savings for the city, and in some cases even money coming into the city. So they're very low risk. That's why those can be delegated, whereas the other two have not had that same delegation level. In terms of the authority to execute cost sharing agreements and incentive agreements, there's a wide range of these agreements that could be happening. That could be very specific, a smaller one on a project basis versus a much larger or broader one that could have more implications for the city as a whole. That's why the authority to execute has been left with the clerk and mayor. So staff would approve it, but the final signature is the clerk and mayor rather than Ms. Scher. But that said, they can all still be approved by staff at that level. The connection versus the connection or generation agreements with utilities, these happen much more frequently and with shorter lead times and don't have the same broad implications for the city. So that approval has been, or that authority to execute has been left with the DCM.
Councillor Pribble.
Thank you very much all for the answers. No more questions.
Okay, and I have no one else on the speakers list. So unless anyone else has questions or comments, I'm going to ask the clerk to open the vote on the consent agenda items excluding 2.5.
Closing the vote, that motion's passed 4-0.
Next on our agenda is the items for direction. So we will deal with these first, and then I'll just remind colleagues that 2.5 will be dealt with after the items for direction are complete. So 4.1 is considerations to the appointments of the London Community Advisory Committees. And there are multiple committees with vacancies that we are considering appointments to today. I will let colleagues know in advance that this is an appointment process that comes through corporate services during a vacancy that occurs during the council term, as opposed to the appointments that are made through SPPC at the beginning of the term. Now, this replacement of vacancies during the term is currently under review at Governance Working Group, so this process may have some recommended changes coming forward at some point, but this is the process that's consistent with our policies at this time. Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you, and through you, this might be a question back at you, but you're referring to the vacancy. So from what I understand, these community advisory committees have anywhere from like 11 to 12 members for each committee, is that correct? And then the vacancies that we see, like, you know, requires 3 spots, requires 8 spots that we're seeing on the agenda, those are the vacant seats that we're trying to fill? Is that right?
Well, I'm going to let the clerk respond to that, as she's worked on the terms of reference for these advisory committees.
Thank you. And through the chair, each community advisory committee may have up to 15 members. The requirement that is outlined on your agenda represents what is required to get to the 15 maximum. So there's no reappointment at this point in time. It does not affect current appointments. This is just additional appointments.
Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you, and through you, just to follow up to that. So I do see, I think it was on the very first vote, we have for the Animal Welfare Community Advisory Committee, it requires up to 8 members, but we have 2. So I was just wondering, so are we doing another round in the future, looking to fill those vacant seats if we were to fill it, if we were to vote for on the 2 candidates on that list?
And we'll go to the clerk.
That decision is the committee's. There are only 2 applications that have been received at this point in time. Certainly, we would welcome additional applications, and then we would bring those forward as they came. There's not an intent at this point in time, unless council directs, that we would go back out. We did do a pretty fulsome attempt at trying to recruit and solicit applications at this time.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. Councillor Ferreira, does that answer your questions for now? I'm going to just, yes. So I'm going to ask the clerk to walk us through 2 process steps here. The first is that we do have committees that maybe have excess vacancies compared to the number of applicants. We also have committees that do not have or that have more than the number of applicants required to fill all the vacancies. So clerk, can you advise if, from the list of applicants, if all the vacancies have to be filled, if the councillors are satisfied or not satisfied with the applications? And can you just very quickly advise colleagues on the voting process for the selections?
Thank you. And through the chair, the short answer is it's up to you. So for example, where we look at the Animal Welfare Community Advisory Committee and there's 2 applications and up to 8 vacancies, it's the committee's prerogative whether you would choose to just appoint those 2. And if you feel that you don't want to appoint them, we could go through the selection process for that. In terms of the other committees, we do have it set up in the system, but it can be modified very simply to allow you to vote for up to 3, for example, for the Community Advisory Committee on Planning, up to 4 for the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Community Advisory, et cetera. So we're in your hands as to how you would like to manage that.
So Councillor Stevenson, is that helpful? Okay, Councillor Trossow.
I have a general question. Is it required that the applicant disclose on the face of their application that they are resident in the City of London?
Ms. Westlake Power.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, that is a current requirement, but it is under review. So it is a requirement at this time.
So would I ask right now about the person who applied that indicated a non-London address, or should I hold that?
I think actually, Councillor Trossow, if that is a concern, it would be appropriate to raise that when we're dealing with the committee where that application has landed, so that councillors can factor that into their decision-making as to whether they, notwithstanding our policy, still feel that they want to appoint that person. But I'm just going to check with the clerk to see if, notwithstanding our policy, that is, and I'm seeing the nodding of heads, but we'll get Ms. Westlake Power to confirm.
Thank you. Through the chair has provided the same advice that I would provide.
Councillor Trossow?
Yes. The solicitation for the applications made it very clear that the applicant has to live in the city, has to have a residence in the city. Is that right? Okay. putting aside the fact that the particular person who I'm referring to here would be a excellent, I'm not getting into that, but if we're going to be accepting applications from people who do not meet the stated criteria and say, well, the committee later on can decide where that's going to land and how they're going to do it, I don't think that's a fair process. And I either want to make that clear to everybody and solicit more applications, or I would like to enforce the rule. And this is a difficult thing to say because I'm not getting into the merits of any of the applications. I'm just on the process part now. But we can't tell the public that you have to live in the city, and then we get an application from somebody who, on the face of it, doesn't live in the city, and then we say, well, we're gonna allow that anyway, and we'll kick the can down the street to see what the committee of jurisdiction wants to do. I don't think we can operate that way.
Thank you. Councillor?
I do have another question. Disclosures of pecuniary interest are often referred to at the beginning of every agenda. Would this be a feature of advisory committee agendas?
Ms. Westlake Power?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, that is an item on every community advisory committee agenda.
Okay, thank you. That answers my procedural questions, and I guess as long as I have the floor, I'll move that we accept 4.1A applicants A and B, and further that we ask the clerk to open up that process to solicit some more applications. And I'll leave it to the clerk to decide how long that should stay open.
Okay, so we have a motion from Councillor Trussow to appoint both applicants to the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee. It requires up to 8 members. We only have 2 applicants at this time. And Councillor Trussow did indicate that the part B to his motion would be that the clerk shall keep the vacancies, and I will let the clerk wordsmith this appropriately, but keep the remaining vacancies open and posted on the city website and circulate an additional round for applications to be received. And we're just going to give the clerk a moment to get that typed up. And while the clerk is typing, Councillor Ferreira has indicated he will second. And while that is being typed up, I know we don't have the language right in front of us right yet, but we'll see if there's any discussion on that motion. Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you, and through you. If we run into, I think we're going to be running into this issue again for some other spots, I believe. Actually, maybe not. I was going to say if we ran into that issue again, let's keep those other applications open, but I think this is the only one that we're running into that. So I'll remove that. Thanks.
Thank you. So members, if you refresh your eScribe, if you don't have it in front of you right now, that motion is now in eScribe. It will appear if you click the consideration of appointments for London Community Advisory Committees as resolution number 6. Just make sure everybody's had a chance to review that. And if everyone is ready, we will ask the clerk to open the vote on this.
Closing the vote, and that motion is carried 4-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Moving on, the next one is B, the Community Advisory Committee on Planning. This committee requires up to 3 members at this time. And I'm going to look to see if colleagues wish to proceed any differently than our regular process, which would be to open up a runoff ballot system where we rank 3 candidates because there are 3 vacancies, so we can select 1 candidate for each vacancy, and the candidates will have to attain a majority threshold to be appointed. Councillor Trussow?
Should one of these candidates currently have an active dispute pending with the city that comes within the subject matter of this committee, how would a councillor proceed in terms of raising that question?
Well, that's, I'm going to offer some thoughts, Councillor, because I'm aware of the individual you're referring to. But this particular advisory committee has actually already dealt with that matter. It would also be pecuniary interest, so the member would have to declare pecuniary interest and recuse themselves from participating on that file should it come back to that committee. But I can advise that as a member of the Planning Committee, that matter will be decided on at tonight's Planning and Environment Committee by the committee. So it would be a decided matter of council before this member's appointment is confirmed.
That's helpful, but it could also be referred back to the committee. But I think the way you answered the question is fine. It would not preclude a person from serving on the committee, but it would preclude participation in that particular matter.
Yes, the pecuniary interest can be personal as well as professional. For example, and I will just reference because we've already voted on the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, Mr. Rael, of course, is involved with the Humane Society, so there could be a pecuniary interest in anything that the committee is advising on with regard to the Humane Society, and he would have to declare a pecuniary interest. The same would be true in this case, and in this case it's a personal matter rather than a professional one, but if the committee were to refer that back and it would come forward, that would be a pecuniary interest.
Thank you. I'm prepared to proceed with the vote.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before we ask the clerk to open the vote? Seeing none, then I will ask the clerk to open the first round of voting for the Community Advisory Committee on Planning.
Through the chair, the result of the first round of selection sees Mark Ambrosio, Jeff Gard, and Sarvarinder Singh Dohil, my apologies for the pronunciation there, each receiving 2 votes, which is the most votes. These are not majority of the members present, but it is a majority in this selection. So if the committee would like to advance to an additional round to get a majority, a more fulsome majority, we could drop off the candidates that received 0 votes. Thank you. And again, my apologies in advance for the mispronunciation, or maybe that's the one that you got. Mark Ambrosio.
Yeah, I got the third one.
Jeff Gard. The candidates that received 0 votes were Crispin Colvin and Stephen Fenn.
So colleagues, we have 3 candidates, none of whom obtained a majority, an outright majority, but they're the majority of the members present. We can move forward with an appointment of those 3 individuals, or we can go to a second round of voting, which removes the candidates who had 0 and allows those of us who selected a candidate with who only received 1 vote an opportunity to move our vote to someone else, which might potentially create an outright majority. But I am in your hands. We would need either a motion for a second round or a motion for the appointment of those 3 individuals. Councillor Stevenson?
Thank you. I'll put forward a motion that we appoint these 3.
And is there a seconder for that? Councillor Ferreira, you have a question?
I was just, before anything, I was just hoping to have a little bit more discussion on just where everybody stands. So if I see that no one is going to be moving their vote, then I don't see why that would be an improper motion. I would second that. But before anything, I just wanted to see, just for our time consideration, would anybody be changing their vote?
So this is the challenge we come up with when we have a long list and we don't have all members of committee present, and we actually have an even number. So we don't have an odd number to sort of break any ties. So we do have, and I'm just going to ask the clerk, how many individuals do we have that received 1 vote?
There are 5 candidates that received 1 vote.
So there are opportunities for members of the committee to choose to support somebody who is on the list right now of the 3, if they wanted to move their votes. And I might consider, I will share that I might consider moving 1 of my votes in the second round. Whether that makes a difference in the outcome or not, I can't say. But we're in your hands. Councillor Ferreira?
With respect to the motion proposed on the floor, I would put a second motion. I don't know if I can do this. If there's a motion, I can't do this at the moment.
Well, we don't have a seconder for the appointments just yet. So I think we have a willingness. I'm just seeing a general consensus that people are ready to have a second round of voting.
That's what I was thinking about motioning. I just want to know if that's the appropriate.
Yep, we will just proceed to have the clerk open a second round. And if any colleagues, while the clerk is preparing that list, want to speak in favor of a candidate that they've selected, now would be the appropriate time to do that. Councillor Trussow.
Yes, I want to speak in favor of candidate A, Mr. Mark Ambrosio, on the grounds that he has a very long working history in the area of heritage. Now, this used to be a standalone committee called the London Advisory Committee on Heritage, and it was just about heritage. And this is more than an advisory committee because it has statutory obligations. And I think of everybody on this list, Mr. Ambrosio is the most familiar with the processes and the procedures of the Heritage Act. And there have been problems with this committee. We've had resignations, and we've had the clerk having to declare certain meetings not having a quorum. And that creates That's bad for advisory committees in general, but I also think it's bad when you've got a statutory matter that has to come up to the Planning and the Environment Committee. I have a lot of confidence in Mark Ambrosio because I know that he's been working in this area, and he would be well qualified to serve on this committee.
Thank you, Councillor Trussell. If colleagues will indulge me the opportunity to just speak from the chair quickly. I am first going to say thank you, Councillor Trussell, for speaking in favor of Mr. Ambrosio, because he was one of the candidates that I had sort of shortlisted, so I appreciate hearing your thoughts on him. I am going to also suggest to colleagues, I supported Jeff Gard, and I do think that having somebody who lives in a heritage property, who lives in a heritage conservation district, who has that lived experience, brings some value to this committee as well. So that's why I supported him, and I would encourage colleagues to give him a quick second look before we cast our second round ballots. I'm also going to say, and although the candidate was not one of the 3 top vote getters, but I want to say I am always uncomfortable when I see an individual write specifically in their application that they're applying because they want to raise their public profile to run in the next election. And we did have a candidate actually write that in their application. I think these advisory committees serve a very important purpose, but they should be served because you have an interest and a passion in the topic. And so I just wanted to share that thought process with colleagues as well as to why there are other candidates that I was, or a particular candidate that I did not cast a vote for. I will not, there are a couple of individuals who did run in the next election, or in the last election. Not all of them wrote that in their application. So I don't want to paint every candidate with the same brush. And I want to be clear about that, but there was somebody who actually wrote that in their application. So that was a bit of a concern for me in that regard. So I'm just sharing that thought. And that's my thoughts on this, and I'll look to see if any other colleagues wish to speak. And I don't have any other hands up. The clerk has advised me she does have the second ballot ready to go. So unless anyone wants to be on the speakers list, I'm going to ask her to open the second round of voting. Seeing none, clerk, if you can open the vote, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, just for the committee's information, the second ballot, because I had to create a new ballot for you, and these are listed in alpha order by last name. So they're in a slightly different order. My apologies in advance for that. Closing this vote, and there's not a majority. So 3 candidates received 0 votes, so we will proceed to a runoff, and the following will be removed from the ballot: Paul Michael Anderson, Robin Easterbrook, and Mohsen Gaber.
And colleagues, I do just want to note that we had a tie at the, for the third slot. While no outright majority was achieved, we did have 2 people tied with 2 votes. We had an individual with 4 votes and an individual with 3 votes.
Can you tell us who they were?
So, yes, we can, yep, we can have the clerk read that out.
Certainly. These are the results of the second round of selection. Savarinder Singh Dohil, 4 votes. Mark Ambrosio, 3 votes. Dana Lynn, 2 votes. Jeff Gard, 2 votes. David Godwin, 1 vote.
Councillor Trosao.
So if there are 5 of us here, if there are 5 voting, but only 4 voting present, is that correct?
Councillor Pribble's not a voting member.
I know. So we have 4 votes here, right?
We have 4 committee members voting, each with 3 votes.
Right. So wouldn't the persons who got 3 votes and 4 votes be a majority of the committee, since there are 4 of us?
Well, because no outright majority was achieved, and we have to go to another round of voting, councillors could theoretically move their vote from that 4 vote getter to one of the 2 vote getters to raise them up over the top. So this is the challenge with our even number of councillors.
Okay, but
Go ahead, Councillor Trosao.
I'm sorry, to the chair. We have 4 voting members here, and there's 1 person who got 4 votes. You don't do better than that. And we got another person that got 3 out of 4 votes. I think we should accept those people and then maybe run another ballot for the other 3. And this is probably not the place to raise it, but we're just going to keep running into this problem today with so few people voting. And the council is going to want to change this anyway, which is why they should go to the SPPC.
But so there are, process-wise, there are a couple of options before us. Certainly, we could end up in a tie again, and at one point, if we are in a deadlock tie, then that is drawn by lot to break the tie. I suspect you are right, Councillor Trosao, that when this gets to council, that council may have a different opinion in terms of somebody who was chosen by lot. We could refer this to council with no committee recommendation and just let all 15 members vote at council. We can have another round of voting and see how those numbers come out. I'm really in committee's hands. This absolutely, there are different ways to deal with it. We can, at some point, if we continue to have ties, we would end up drawing by lot. If you feel that it is more expedient to refer this directly to council without a recommendation, that's also an option. But again, I'm in the hands of the committee on how to proceed with this. Councillor Stevenson?
Thank you. I'm wondering if we should do one more round of voting, and then if we're not getting anywhere, I would put forward the motion to refer it to council and do the vote there.
Councillor Trosao?
That's doable, but we could also just sort of refer it to council, it being noted that so-and-so got 4 votes, so 3 votes, 2 votes, and 1 vote.
And the vote count would be in the record, in the minutes that go forward from this committee to council, so.
We're referring this to council, it being noted that after 2 ballots, it was 4, 3, 2, 2, 1. It just means.
Yeah. Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you, and through you. I just wanted to maybe just throw out some words. Just committee work should be done on committee, and this upcoming council agenda is going to be, it's looking like it's going to be pretty heavy. So I'm worried on how long this vote may take us if we don't have a committee recommendation going to council. So I wouldn't necessarily be too on the side of sending it to council. I would like to have a vote, but I guess it is up to the committee. Like if the committee decides, if there's a majority here, I guess that thinks that council may want to vote on this as a whole, then I see that too. But I would say that, we should be trying to make some type of recommendation for council from this committee.
So I will just let councillors know that I've already suggested to the mayor that he'll need to order dinner and plan for a dinner break at the next council, because I too think it may take us a little while to get through the agenda. I will say that if we start running into this issue as we move forward on all of these selections, it could be a challenge. But I'm personally not adverse to sending it with the candidates who have their vote totals right now to council either. So again, in your hands, I guess what we want to decide is, do we want to do one more round of voting, or do we want to refer this to council without a recommendation? I suspect that we may be doing work on these lists at council anyway. As Councillor Trussow noted, there's only 4 of us here. There are 15 voting members of council. And there may be names that got 0 votes here that could potentially get 8 votes at council. So I'm not sure that I am, referring it to council without a recommendation is necessarily going to hold up the council meeting any longer, because I think we may see some changes brought forward anyway. But completely in your hands. My only sort of caveat to colleagues is if we decide to refer this one to council without a recommendation and we run into this problem with further votes, I would suggest that we may want to adopt the same process so that we're consistent with all of them, so that our colleagues know what to expect when it does get to council. And I will go to Councillor Pribble for his thoughts before we make a decision here.
Thank you. And procedure-wise, I'm just wondering, if one had 4, one had 3, can you just go 1 and 2 and then just put the 2 names with 2 and you just vote for the 3rd place? Would it be possible? Because one has 4, one has 3, they go through, and the two voters, which is Danilin and Jeff Gard, can you just vote on them for 3rd place and we move on?
So if we were going to do that, just for colleagues' information, first of all, the runoff software is actually not set up to handle that until we've attained a majority. And we would also have to do notwithstanding our current policy. So I think it would be cleaner to perhaps not go that route. But that's my advice. Again, it is anybody can make a motion as a committee member. And I should point out, if people don't move their votes, we get the same result anyway. So there's that factor to consider. Councillor Ferreira?
Thank you. Through you. I would motion to eliminate candidates with 0 votes and revote.
So if we revote, we did have one candidate that had 1 vote. That candidate as the lowest vote getter would drop off as well.
Through you, that's fine.
Okay, so we now have a suggestion that we vote a 3rd time. I'm looking to see if Councillor Stevenson. Okay, Councillor Stevenson is supportive of that as well. I'm not seeing objections from anybody, so we will have 1 more round of voting, and we'll see what the outcome of that results in. And we will need to give the clerk a moment to create a new ballot again. Oh, the clerk says actually she is ahead of us, and we can go ahead and open that vote.
Closing the vote, and there continues to be no majority. The candidates Dana Lynn and Jeff Gard each received 2 votes. So by lot, we would draw from those 2 names to determine the 3rd appointment.
And just for colleagues' information, Mr. Ambrosio and Mr. Dohill each received 4 this round. We are back to essentially the same outcome we had before. So now we have 2 options. We can draw by lot, or we could still, notwithstanding the results of this, we could still forward to council without a recommendation if somebody. Yeah. And that would take precedence. So Councillor Trussell.
I believe that drawing by lot at this small committee is going to be meaningless because council's going to want to revisit that anyway. And since we do have 2 of the candidates received all of the votes, I think we should forward those 2 names on and say that there was a tie between the other 2, and council can do what they want, but at least there's an indication that those 2 received unanimous consent from this committee, which I think is quite an achievement.
So what I'm hearing, Councillor, is that you are moving a motion to refer this to council for further deliberation, including the results of the votes conducted at this committee, which would be part of the minutes, but you want it being noted that the candidates received 4-4 and 2-2. Okay, so a referral does take precedence over the matter on the floor, so we can move to refer this to council. So we're referring it without a recommendation, but we are including the results of our voting here so that colleagues are aware of where the votes fell. And I'm seeing a general nodding. Do I have a seconder for the referral? Councillor Stevenson. Any debate on this? Seeing none, we'll just give the clerk a moment to get this motion typed up for us. And the clerk does have that now ready for us in eScribe. If you refresh, you will see that. And that is motion or number 9 in our eScribe under this item. And I'll just read it out. That the consideration of appointments to the Community Advisory Committee on Planning be forwarded to the Municipal Council for decision. It being noted the following vote record from Corporate Services Committee. Mr. Ambrosio, 4 votes. Mr. Dolehill, 4 votes. Ms. Dana Lynn, 4 votes. Sorry, that should be 2 votes. and Mr. Guard 2 votes. We'll just get that corrected quickly. Is now in the system. So I will ask the clerk to open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the referral is passed 4-0.
Moving on, colleagues, 4.1C is the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Community Advisory Committee. This requires up to 4 members, and we have 5 applicants to select from. And I will open the floor to any questions or comments that colleagues wish to offer in regard to any of the applicants before we open the vote. And seeing none, I will ask the clerk to open the first round ballot for us.
Closing the vote, and the selection process has resulted in 4 votes for Salim Attia, 4 votes for Nandini Syed, 3 votes for David Godwin, and 3 votes for Margot Stothers. And that's a majority.
All right, colleagues, so we need a motion now for the appointment of those 4 individuals.
What were the other 2 votes?
The other 2 votes went to Ms. Graham. Councillor Stevenson?
I'll put the motion forward that we appoint those 4.
Okay, and do we have a seconder? Councillor Ferreira? And I will just ask the clerk now to open the vote to appoint those 4 individuals. Give us just a second here to get that ready to go.
Closing the vote, the motion is passed 3-1.
Thank you, colleagues. And moving on to 4.1D, the Environmental Stewardship and Action Community Advisory Committee. This requires up to 5 members, and we have 8 applications for this committee. So I'll look to see if there's any comments on any of the applications before we proceed to the first round of voting. Councillor Trussow.
I'd like to speak on behalf of applicant B, Becca Amendola. I've known her for about 2 years now. I've worked with her on a variety of different issues. I should say, including the fireworks issue, which is going to be very contentious. But she is she's very well versed in doing research. She's worked with the Fanshawe College and the King's College environmental groups, and she has a propensity as a student for doing really, really top quality research, whether you agree with her positions or not. I also want to say that she has already gotten quite a bit of experience in the last few years speaking at City Council, as she's done several representations to the CAPS committee over the years, and her representations are always full of citations and links to research. So I think the committee would be very well served to have her in its group. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Trossow. Any other speakers? Seeing none, then I will ask the clerk to open the vote.
Closing the vote, and the results are as follows. Representing majority votes of the committee, Becca Amendola, 3 votes. Marianne Hodge, 3 votes. Allison Pert, 3 votes. Russell Duvernoy, 2 votes. And Amy Ford, 2 votes. The additional candidates, Alfred Bobie, Jordan Buck, and Susan Ratz, each received 1 vote.
So we do have our 5 candidates. So we'll look now for a motion to approve those 5. Councillor Trossow, Councillor Ferreira. And we'll ask the clerk to open the vote on that in just a moment. Just going to give her a second to get that ready. And the clerk is going to open the vote on that now for the appointment of those 5 individuals.
Councillor Trosso? Closing the vote, that motion is passed 4-0.
And moving on, the 4.1E is the final item under the advisory committee appointments. And again, this is 3 members, and we have 7 applications for this particular committee. There was an added application that was not on the regular agenda, but was on the added agenda. Councillor Trosso.
How did an additional application get on the added agenda if there was a strict deadline?
Ms. Westlake Power.
Thank you. Through the chair, following the deadline for applications, which is posted on the city's website, we do remove the application. However, if the application has been initiated prior to its removal, it can still be utilized and submitted. And then we manage those submissions the same as any submission for a committee agenda.
But it wasn't submitted?
Ms. Westlake Power.
Thank you. It was not received by our office before the submission deadline, correct?
Then it's not clear to me why we should be considering it.
So, Councillor, I'm just going to share that late applications have been received for not only for advisory committees, but for boards, agencies, and commissions as well. And we have never disqualified somebody for submitting their application late. So, colleagues, I'm going to look to see if there are any comments on any of the applications submitted. Councillor Trosso.
Yes, I'm going to speak on behalf of 2 of the candidates. They're both people who I personally know and who I have personally worked with. So when I speak of their qualifications to be on this committee, it's based on firsthand knowledge. First, I want to point out that Dr. Christopher DeGroot has been a regular, active participant in transit questions for a number of years now. He was a member of the former cycling committee, which of course is now being folded into this committee. I think it would be very important to have Professor DeGroot can continue on for this continuity. I also want to speak on behalf of Emily Fourier. She is currently serving as the external vice president for the university students at the University of Western Ontario. This is a very high position in the student government, and she is responsible for all of the government advocacy work that goes on. This has been a very, very valuable office, and it's been a very active office over the last few years, both in terms of their work, in terms of trying to drive student turnout in the election, and also their participation in several situations here. To have the vice president external volunteer to serve on a committee is an offer that I would have a very difficult time refusing. I also want to say that much of the university students reside in my ward, and far and away, I can represent that during the campaign, when I was speaking to people in the student areas and when I was speaking to students directly, transit was the far and away most significant issue. So having her on this committee is going to be very important when you consider what an important constituency the students are in the transit field. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other committee members want to speak in favor of any applicants for this position? I see none, so if committee will indulge me briefly from the chair, I will, first of all, echo Councillor Trossow's comments with regard to Ms. Poirier. I will certainly be supporting her. My interactions with her as well have been top-notch, and I think it would serve us well to have somebody from the student community involved in discussing transportation issues. I am also going to be strongly supporting Amanda Pfeffer, who, although she was added to this slate of candidates as a London police officer who works in traffic, I think that perspective for transportation advice is very valuable to us, because part of transportation is how transportation regulations are enforced, which often falls to our London Police Services. So I think we would be very well served by having a representative from the London Police Services on this board. I'm also going to say that I found Mr. Lardner's application compelling as a father of two and looking at the future and transportation, but in particular his references to transit for families was important to me too. So his application also sort of rose to the top of my short list in terms of some people who I think would provide some different insights in terms of how people move around the city. So I just wanted to share my thoughts in terms of where I might be putting some of my support, and I'll leave it at that and see if anyone else wants to be on the speakers list before we open the first ballot. Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to open the first ballot. And just to remind colleagues, there are 3 vacancies, so everyone has 3 votes on this.
So the first round of selection has resulted in no majority. The following is the vote summary. Poirier, 4 votes. De Groot, 2. Isa, 2. Pfeffer, 2. Lardner, 1. Macklem, 0. Power, 0.
All right, colleagues, so we will move on to a second round of voting, and we will remove the 0 and 1 vote candidates from the ballot, and then cast our second round.
Through the chair, the second round will include Poirier, De Groot, Isa, and Pfeffer. After the second round, the results are Poirier, 4 votes, De Groot, 2 votes, Isa, 3 votes, Pfeffer, 2 votes. So again, there is no majority of the committee with respect to the 3 that are able to be chosen.
Thank you, clerk. So colleagues, I'm going to recommend that as we did earlier, that we take the same approach. If somebody is willing to move a referral with the vote selection that this committee has ended at, forwarded to council for its consideration, that would be consistent with how we dealt with this earlier, rather than drawing lots. And Councillor Stevenson, you're willing to move that? Do we have a seconder for that? I'll second that. And I will ask the clerk to prepare that and open the vote. And we do have an opportunity while she's typing that in, if colleagues want to offer any questions or comments on the referral. Okay, the clerk advises me that that is now ready in East. And I will just read that out for colleagues. That the consideration of appointments to the Integrated Transportation Community Advisory Committee be forwarded to the Municipal Council for a decision, it being noted the following voting record from Corporate Services Committee. Poirier, 4 votes. Isa, 3 votes. DeGroot, 2 votes. Pfeffer, 2 votes. And we'll ask the clerk to now open that for voting.
Closing the vote, the referral is passed 4-0.
Thank you, colleagues. That concludes the 4.1, all 5 subclauses of it with regard to appointments to the advisory committees. We do have additional items on the agenda under items for direction. These are all related to the issuances of proclamations. They are 4.2, Blood Cancer Awareness Month, 4.3, Arthritis Awareness Month, 4.4, Freedom of the City from the HMCS Prevo, and 4.5, National Coaches Week. I will note in reviewing these myself that the first 3 all had clear ties to the City of London. The final one, in my review of it, did not. So we can proceed as we normally have, in that we can deal with these as a group, we can deal with them individually, we can deal with the first 3 as a group, and then the final one separately. I'm in committee's hands, but I see Councillor Trussow nodding that we'll deal with the first 3 as a group. If he'll move that, and we need a seconder for that, Councillor Ferreira. And so I will ask the clerk to open the vote to approve 4.2 through 4.4. And that vote is now open.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 3-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So that brings us to 4.5, issuance of proclamation for National Coaches Week. And I would just look to colleagues. I'll speak to this very briefly from the chair. You know, here I am, somebody who's been on a bench to help coach a hockey team, and I'm not ready to approve the issuance of proclamation for National Coaches Week, because there was nothing in the application that clearly outlined the connection to London. And there are lots of great coaches in this community worthy of recognition and an appreciation for the time they volunteer. But there are lots of organizations that could have signed on to this. So if somebody was prepared to receive this and direct the clerk to follow up with the organization to return to us some more information. I will note that National Coaches Week is not until September 16th. So there is an opportunity to provide us information and still meet the deadline for their needs. Councillor Trussow and Councillor Stevenson are both amenable to that. And so we will just give the clerk a moment to prepare that. And the clerk has opened the vote on that, and I'll just read it out. Dated July 5th from the Coaches Association of Ontario with respect to National Coaches Week, the proclamation request be received, it being noted that the City Clerk's office will follow up on the application in advance of the council meeting of July 25th.
Closing the vote, that motion's passed 4-0.
Thank you, colleagues. That completes items for direction. Under deferred matters, we have from our consent agenda 2.5, the Council Policy Manual Review. And Councillor Trussow, you asked for this to be pulled, so I wonder if you would like to start us off on this item.
First of all, I really recognize the amount of work that goes into this. Updating our bylaws and our policies in an ongoing way is very important. But I don't think it's feasible, I'll leave it at that, or workable, to give close to 50 amendments to the public, to the press, to this committee at one time. And while I appreciate the representation made, that these are mostly minor housekeeping issues, I'll note that sometimes somebody's housekeeping issue is somebody else's important procedural issue. So I can't proceed with this as it's given to us. I was told just informally by recollection that several years ago, the mayor and two of the councilors did some additional work on this. And I'm wondering if somebody could help me with that. I think this would be a good candidate for, if it would be procedurally okay, having the chair or maybe two members of the committee work with civic administration to sort through these and pare it down. I guess my other grave concern here is this should not be a consent item, because I just think it's just too consequential for it to be a consent item. So I'm not sure how to proceed. So I'm going to start with an easy one, and that is we refer this entire matter to the governance committee for a discussion about how to proceed with these cleanup. I don't even want to say cleanup because some of them might not be these amendments, and that it come back. I guess the other question I would have is there a reason why these can't be staggered?
Well, let's go to Ms. Livingston on the question of whether or not these could be staggered and get her comments on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the clerk leads this work, but I would say that in order to manage the volume, staggering makes a significant amount of sense to me. And perhaps with the referral to GWG, that allows us to create a more manageable process for council in receiving these every other year when the complete review is done by staff.
And I was just checking, I do not see the city clerk on the call. He is in another meeting at this time, but I will just, because the city clerk's office is leading this, I will just check in with Deputy Clerk, Ms. Westlake Power. Oh, Mr. Card is online, so he might be able to give us some insight on this as well. Mr. Card, with regard to the prospect of staggering these policy reviews, did you have any thoughts that you might wish to share with the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We don't have any preference. We're at the service of council in consolidating these policies from time to time. So whatever approach the council wishes to follow would be certainly fine with us. We do housekeeping amendments, though, and I think for our own service area, for example, we identified a policy which was no longer applicable because it had been overtaken by changes in our own processes and legislation. So, I mean, that's the type of thing that we're talking about. But if the council would like to receive a presentation, for example, as Ms. Livingston said, certainly we could describe these various amendments at GWG and allow the council to be familiar with them before they appear on the agenda. So I appreciate Councillor Trosaw's comments about this being a consent item. I think that really the question is whether or not the changes are of a housekeeping nature. And I realize again that there could be some differences of opinion about what's housekeeping and what isn't, but we're certainly available to discuss these various changes if the council so directs.
Thank you for that, Mr. Card. And I am just going to get Ms. Westlake Power to share a quick thought on this as well.
Thank you through the chair. And as Mr. Card has indicated, you will note that from time to time, council policies come forward in a different manner off this cycle, where there is a more significant change proposed or where a change is initiated by way of a communication from a councillor or from civic administration. So those less housekeeping changes to policies occur in that manner, and this represents the administrative review of in accordance with the policy that addresses the maintenance of the policies. But again, as Ms. Livingston has indicated, we're in your hands as how you would like to proceed.
Thank you, Ms. Westlake Power. Councillor Trossaw?
The only other point I want to make, along with staggering, is that some of these policies look like they belong to one of the standing committees. Some of them are clearly in the area of planning. Some of them are clearly in the area of civic works. And I think one of the things the governance committee might want to consider, and I don't want to make that decision now, is in figuring out how to spread out the workload on these and allocate them. They be sent to the committees that have the requisite expertise where that's possible. But I guess I'm moving that I would like to refer this matter in its entirety to the governance working committee, and I don't think I need to add anything to that.
Okay, so first we'll see if there's a seconder to refer the entire thing. Councillor Stevenson, seconding. Okay, then I'm going to ask, I'm going to go to Councillor Ferreira for his question, and then Councillor Ferreira, I'm going to ask you to take the chair so I can speak to the referral.
Thank you, and through you, I just wanted to speak about the staggering portion. So if we bring this to the governance working group, from what I understand, staggering would be we have so many items come to the group, discuss and review, and then on another date, we'll have so many items come to the group until we get to the full length of the entire manual. I just wanted to confirm that.
So I don't want to engage too much in cross debate, but I do want to give Councillor Trussow an opportunity to respond to what his intent is with this.
Yes, my intention is not for these to start coming, all 41 of them, one after another, to governance. It's to talk about what the process should be for how to deal with these.
Thank you, Councillor Trussow.
And thank you, and through you, okay, so I like that, I just want to confirm that, and I'll take the chair, and I have Deputy Mayor Lewis first on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. So I think, first of all, on the referral, I'm not going to support the referral as is, and I want to explain some rationale here. First, we have 3 parts to the staff recommendation, and I think it's very, very important that we approve Clause A, which formally brings in our bylaws to adopt our anti-racism and anti-oppression policy that quite an amount of work has gone into. And right now, we do need to officially forward that to council to bring into effect. I would not want to delay that work. I think it's very important and it's very critical to our strategic plan as well as our multi-year budget business cases moving forward in terms of applying those lenses if we don't have that policy officially in place. Likewise, the municipal compliance service, I think we do need to move forward on that one. The other clause, C, is I think equally important in that we have some bylaws on the books and some policies that are out of date. And a couple of those actually relate to having those repealed relate to passing the anti-oppression, anti-racism policy. And so, for example, the gender equity and recreation services, that's now covered under the anti-racism and anti-oppression policy. Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. The diversity and inclusion policy is also covered by the anti-racism and anti-oppression policy now. The City of London race relations similarly. So we're repealing some policies that are and bylaws that are on the books right now that are no longer really in force and effect, and we are holding that back. The sitting of the cannabis retail stores in London, that's been superseded by policies of a senior level of government. That was introduced before those senior levels of government policies were in place. So I really don't want to hold up A and C. I will say on Clause B, I completely understand where Councillor Trussow is coming from. This was a tremendous amount of reading to try and digest in the time that we've had this agenda. There's a lot of policies on here, and even though they are relatively small in terms of the housekeeping changes, there was a lot to absorb and to try and figure out if there's anything that we wanted to perhaps reconsider. But I'm also of 2 thoughts on this. Referring this to GWG, I will say as the chair, a lot of these are going to probably sit in limbo for quite some period of time. I think everybody on this committee is actually on governance working group, and as you're aware, we've 2 meetings in a row not even completed the agenda that we had before us, and we're likely to do the same in the July meeting because we've got some pretty substantive items ahead of us. And I do think about some of the housekeeping amendments in here. And for example, I'm going to point out the Mayor's New Year's Honor List policy. During the last term of council, Mayor Holder added a new category, and updating that so that we can continue to recognize 4 distinguished Londoners is important to formalize in our policy. We have been essentially making those recognitions notwithstanding the policy that's currently on the books. Similarly, we've got childcare policies where the Child Care Advisory Committee no longer exists as part of the work that was done to revise and merge and eliminate some of the advisory committees in the last term. So I think there are some things here that it's really important that we just get the housekeeping piece done, and that we would be tying up a lot of time reviewing things that really are truly housekeeping. The other reason I'm not super supportive of the referral of the entire package is because I think that governance working group is the appropriate place to send a policy for review. And if this was pulling out 2 or 3 policies specifically, that council wanted to dig deeper into, I would be supportive of that, very much so. You know, I think about the request to waive or reduce facility rental fees. That's one that I get asked about regularly from constituents and community groups looking to utilize community space. Do we need to review that? I also look at things like the list is so long I have to keep scrolling up and down. And to the councillor's point, that is the problem. But when we're talking about, for example, the council remuneration, well, that's already before the governance working group. So what we're doing right now would be amending the policy consistent with the direction of the prior council, but then the governance working group may bring forward a recommendation for future changes. So even if we approved these housekeeping matters today, absolutely nothing prevents us as councillors from picking out 2, 3, 10 of these policies and referring, making a motion to refer those policies to governance working group for further review. So my challenge is in doing this as a block, rather than if there were specific ones that people wanted to dig into deeper, I could be supportive of that. I would also be supportive of future motions that say, I want to review this specific policy. I know we had a communication that talked about the naturalized area and wildflower meadows from a member of the public. And that may be worthy of a deeper review. I know that discussion has happened with Ms. Scher's division and the parks folks in particular several times. So I think that I think it's an and both, to quote our city manager, that we should approve these, but we should also look, and perhaps even as a motion that comes to council on our regular agenda related to this, that we should perhaps also have a motion that directs some of these policies to governance working group for some deeper review. So for me, I'm not opposed to having governance working group look at some of these, but I think it's an and both. I think we approve the staff recommendations today, but then be completely open to reviewing some of these policies going forward. I know we had another communication from a member of the public about our property standards bylaw and that policy. And I think that there's a conversation to be had there. I like the idea of allowing people to do naturalized plantings in their boulevards, and we have people doing those, but in the policy, it's technically not allowed. So it's kind of been one of those ones where we've allowed it if there's not a complaint. But and that's one where I would like to see us make some changes. So that's where I'm going with this is I'm not willing to support the referral on the whole, but I understand the councillor's challenges with absorbing all of this because I had the same ones. And I also think that the idea of staggering these in the future has a lot of merit so that it's not as overwhelming a process. So those are my comments, Mr. Presiding Officer.
And thank you for your comments, Councillor. I have Councillor Trosso next on the list, and I'll yield the chair back to you.
I don't know if I can amend my own motion, but I'd be very happy to proceed with A1, A2, and also with C2, C3, and C5. I'd be very happy to proceed with that today. Pardon? And C6. C1, C2, C3, C5, C6, A1, A2, I would be very happy to dispose of today. The rest of my referral request stands. Just as a point of information, I don't know if we do those or not, but the yards bylaw is actually coming to Civic Works tomorrow for exactly that point. And you know, some of these 49 maybe don't need to be looked at. Some of them do. But I don't want to, I'm not willing to do that today. And if this motion is defeated and we proceed to go through this, I'm going to ask for all 49 items to be called separately.
That is your prerogative, Councillor. So so we don't have anybody else on the speakers list. Councillor Ferreira, just before I go to you, did we have anybody besides Councillor Trussell on the speakers list when you returned the chair? Okay, no. So I'm going to go to Councillor Ferreira now.
And thank you, and through you, I just wanted to speak on another note with Councilor Trusso's motion, which I will second on that as well. I wanted to speak with, or just go to staff for the City Hall's flag policy review that we're currently undergoing right now. I have been speaking with the clerk's office a little bit about that, and that's pertaining to the actual flags at City Hall itself. I just wanted to know if there's any update on when that review will be complete, because I did see that it's not going to be complete for this list that I saw here, but I just wanted to get some update on that, if possible.
I think that would fall to the clerks. Ms. Corman?
That policy requires further review and consultation, which we have been undertaking and is scheduled to come forward on the next committee cycle as a standalone matter and report.
Thank you for that, Ms. Corman. Councillor Ferreira.
Thank you, through you. Thank you very much. So the next committee cycle, that would be a committee cycle for this committee, correct? Okay, thank you.
Okay, before we advance any further on this, the seconder was, on the referral was Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Trussow has then moved an amendment to his referral. So as the preliminary seconder, Councillor Stevenson, are you in support? Because if not, what we have to do is have you withdraw, and then another seconder would need to be indicated. And I know Councillor Ferreira has indicated that he's willing, but you've already seconded the referral. So are you going to be supportive of the amended? Okay, so you want to withdraw your referral, your second on the original, and then Councillor Ferreira is willing to second the amended referral. Okay, any other comments, questions before we call the vote on this? Councillor Trussow?
Should we call the vote on A1, A2, and those Cs separately and get that out of the way, or should we just do this as one package?
Well, it is right now it is a referral. So the referral takes precedence.
Right, but
Okay, so the procedural way forward is first we need the, on the advice of the clerk, what we need to do is to, the cleanest way to do this is if committee consents to the councillor, rather than going through a series of amendments on a referral, if the councillor is willing to withdraw his original referral and put the new referral on the floor, then we can dispense with it that way, and that will clear things up. So, Councillor, are you willing to withdraw your original and then move it again?
So I withdraw my original referral, which was the matter in its entirety, and in its place, I would refer that all of item B, as well as item C, other than 2, 3, 4, and 6, or actually item C, 1, 4, 7, 8, and 9, be referred to governance.
Okay, so first I'm just going to check with committee. Is there any objection to Councillor Trussow withdrawing his original motion? And I'm seeing none. So now we have a new motion on the floor. Councillor, can I just get you to reiterate those components again?
Yes. That I'd be, the for clarity that I would be interested in proceeding with A1 and A2, as well as C2, 3, 5, and 6, and that accordingly, item B in its entirety and item C, 1, 4, 7, 8, 9, be referred to the governance committee.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Ferreira is willing to second that. So any further discussion on the referral? and bear with us while the clerk works on this. Okay, the clerk does have this now for us in eScribe if you refresh. And it is a motion 3, and it lists the, so this is on the referral that the following items be referred. It lists the entirety of clause B, and then in C, it is listing 1, 4, 7, 8, and 9. So that's in front of you, and I'm looking for any questions or comments. And I'm seeing none. I'm going to just speak briefly from the chair this time. Again, for me, item C has to be dealt with. The cannabis retail stores is not an item that we should be spending time on, in my opinion. It's superseded by provincial regulations now. The athletic travel grants have not been used for years, and I think it's more appropriate that athletes seek out other community sponsors. Again, having operated in that area, there are plenty of opportunities available. The enforcement of city personnel policy, again, I think that has to be repealed so that the new policy can come into effect. I'm really hung up on supporting, not supporting the items that need to be repealed. So I'm still not going to be supportive of this.
You want to separate B and C?
We can certainly separate B and C for a vote, and that's fine. And the clerk says she can do that. So
I just want to limit our differences as much as we can. So if we get bogged down on anything, it's as little as possible.
I think that's fair comment, Councillor, and we will call B and C separately. We will start with B.
Closing the vote, the referral of Part B is passed 4-0.
Now we will ask the clerk to open the vote on Part C. And that vote is now open.
Closing the vote, the motion to refer part of Part C is lost on a tie 2-2.
Okay, so colleagues, that brings us back now to the remaining components of 2.5, which are Part A and Part C. Councillor Trussow.
Be separated, because I'm happy to support Part A and get that out of the way.
So again, we can do this as separate votes. We can call Part A and Part C separately. That's certainly able to be done. And I will direct the clerk to do that. And go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, and I was hoping not to do this, and I'm glad I'm not being asked to do this for the whole 40 of them, but I am going to ask for those 7 to be called separately, and I hope we have the appropriate staff, because we are making a change in policy or bylaw, and I think it's important for the council to have each one of those in front of us and make that determination. And I'm glad there are only well, they're fewer than 7 because some of those are going through with A. So which are the ones that are still not going through with A?
So, Councillor, the best way to proceed is let's deal with Part A first, and then we will call each item in Part C separately.
Although it might, yes, certainly.
Yeah, so we can have 9 up and down votes on Part C after we can dispense with Part A.
But that won't be necessary because a bunch of the ones in Part C go with A and are related to the equity piece, and they can all go along as one. Again, limiting what we're going to be dealing with. You're the chair.
Okay, so the cleanest way to do this, and for the clerk's process, we're going to call each item in Part C separately.
Okay.
And we will first deal with Part A, and we will ask the clerk to open the vote on Part A. Sorry, now I'm getting ahead of myself. We do need a mover and a seconder on Part A. So moved by Councillor Trussow, seconded by Councillor Ferreira. And now we will get that open for the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 4-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Now we're going to move on to Part C. There are 9 items in Part C from the staff recommendation that we will need to deal with. We do have, Ms. Smith is on Zoom, Mr. Card is on Zoom. So as we deal with these individual items, we do have staff present who I think can answer questions on the majority of them. Councillor Trussow, go ahead.
Unless any of the other councillors have questions on 2, 3, 5, and 6, I would be willing to move the repeal of 2, 3, 5, and 6 as a group.
Okay, the clerk is working on that, and we will look for a mover for that. Or a seconder, sorry. I'll second that one. Okay, the clerk has that ready, so we'll open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, that motion is passed 4-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So now moving on, and bear with me as I keep track of all of these items as well. So the next item that we will need to dispense with is C1. That is the athletic travel grants.
It's page 30.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, the item, the actual item. The text of the
I'm sorry, Counselor, I'm working from the PDF, so the page numbers are not the same as the print version. Let's see if we can get you that page number. Bear with me for a minute.
So I want to follow these in terms of the text that we're using.
In the print copy, it is page 304. In the report, this is under 4.3 on page 36. And on this item, athletic travel grants, the report indicates this is recommended for repeal because funds for this initiative were eliminated in 2022. And that's moved by Councillor Stevenson. And I will second that. Oh, Councillor Ferreira, you're willing to second that one? Okay. Any comments or questions? And we do have Ms. Smith here. This would fall under her service area. I see none, so I will ask the clerk to open the vote on that one.
Closing the vote, that motion's passed 4-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Moving on, the next item that we have to deal with under C is item 4. This is the enforcement of city personnel policy. Bear with me for just one moment. I'll get you the page numbers. So the bylaw will be found on page 307, and in the staff report on page 36, the enforcement of city personnel policy, because it is being replaced with a new policy, the municipal compliance services, to reflect the recent reorganization and the new strategic plan. And so this actually goes hand in hand with A2, which we passed earlier. Moved by Councillor Stevenson. And I will second that. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, then I will ask the clerk to open the vote on this one.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 4-0.
On, under 2.5C, item 7, the landing of helicopters policy. And bear with me for just a moment. The page number in the report is 36 for the staff recommendation. And I will just get you the bylaw number in a moment. The bylaw page number is 310. And the, in the report, item 7, the landing of helicopters policy, is because it has been replaced with an administrative procedure. Councillor Stevenson, you're moving. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Ferreira, any questions or comments? Seeing none, then I will ask the clerk to open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 4-0.
Okay, colleagues, moving on, the next item on 2.5C8 is the protocol for unapproved Aboriginal burial sites. You can find the bylaw on page 311, and you will find in the staff report on page 36 the recommendation protocol 8, protocol for unapproved Aboriginal burial sites, because council will review and consult in such cases. And that is the rationale for the repealing of this. We'll look to colleagues to see if there are, moved by Councillor Stevenson. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Trussell? Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, my understanding is this review is going to happen anyway pursuant to some other approval process, so this is redundant?
Ms. Livingston?
Mr. Chair, I would refer that to Mr. Card. His area has carriage of the policy.
Mr. Card.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. The policy was originally adopted under the Cemeteries Act, which called for the consent of the nearest Indigenous community to the remains that were discovered. In our case, there are complexities because the nearest community actually is Oneida Haudenosaunee, and the remains, particularly those which date from more than 500 years ago, actually are members of other Indigenous groups. So we found that the procedure, which allowed consent on the part of a particular group to the city becoming the owner of land that would be set aside in recognition of that burial site, was not actually the best approach. And so, as the councillor anticipates, we intend to make individual recommendations depending on the circumstances that are discovered, particularly the age of the remains. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Card. So we do have a mover in Councillor Stevenson. Do we have a seconder for that? Okay, I will second that one. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to open the vote.
Councillor Ferreira? Closing the vote. Motion's passed 4-0.
Colleagues, our final item under 2.5C9 is the sitting of cannabis retail stores. You will find the bylaw on page 312, and again, the staff recommendation on page 36, which reads under item 9, under 4.3, the sitting of cannabis retail stores in London, because it is redundant with provincial regulations. And we'll look for any questions or comments. Councillor Trussow.
Is it redundant with or is it in conflict with provincial regulations? I guess that's for Mr. Card.
Well, let's ask Mr. Card that one.
To the extent it is in conflict, which it may be in a particular case, it's of no force and effect, and it creates confusion. So that was the basis for the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Card. Councillor Ferreira, you're moving. Councillor Stevenson, you're seconding. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, then I will ask the clerk to open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 4-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So that dispenses with item 2.5 from the consent agenda, which was moved to deferred matters. That leaves us now with 2 items to deal with in confidential session. So I'm going to look for a mover and a seconder to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Stevenson and seconded by Councillor Ferreira. And we'll get the clerk to open the vote on that.
Closing the vote, that motion's carried 4-0.
Thank you, colleagues. So we will be moving into confidential session. We will just need a moment to make sure that we have all the appropriate people in the room for those items. I will advise for members of the public our reasons for going into confidential session. On our public agenda is noted at 6.1 is a labor relations employee negotiations, a matter pertaining to reports, advice, and recommendations of the officers and employees of the corporation concerning labor negotiations and employee negotiations with regard to one of the corporation's unions. And that 6.2 is solicitor-client privilege, a matter pertaining to advice subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, with regard to any litigation in respect to various personal injury and property damage claims against the city.